Shalom, shalom, shalom. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero with the Ways of Israel. Welcome on this Friday morning as we are continuing with the book of Sefer Haikkarim, Rabbi Joseph Albo, incredible rabbi of the Middle Ages, and which gives us the basics of Judaism. This is exactly what Haikkarim means, the fundamentals of the faith, as it were. And a lot of the things that he does and says is responding to his co-religionist, which he was during the period of time of the Inquisition, as you know, a very dark side of Jewish history. And he's responding really to a lot of his contemporaries in response to what is the Jewish positions of things. And so now we're in the last book of the Sefer Haikkarim, which is chapter 4, and believe it or not, the last book has over 41 chapters. So it's not something so light that he gets into. He does get into a lot of science, a lot of philosophy, and also Torah, which he responds to each of the elements accordingly. This morning we're going to take a look at what is speculative knowledge, or what he calls speculative science. And there is something that I think is important to take a look at when Rabbi Albo begins to delineate that in fact all science are speculative. One of the things that we saw in these past 2 years with all of the things happening with the COVID, even though they say science, I was a science teacher in high school for the Landau Yeshiva, and one of the things we understood by science is it's all speculative knowledge. You test it. There's a hypothesis. Test the hypothesis. If it doesn't work out, it's only a theory. There's a lot of things that are passed down as hypothesis that turns into a theory. And what we've seen in these past 2 years with the whole COVID deception, and I call it deception because we now know the truth, is the fact that they were saying this was acceptable. It's the science. You can't go against the science. And in fact, when you say science, which is the word knowledge, it in fact is speculative until it's tested. And when it's tested and proven to be an act, a fact, then you can say this is true science. And in fact, unfortunately, we've had a lot of people who are saying that they're scientists, and they've been found to be fraudulent or lying or or deceiving the public. We still have this issue, even through these different means. A lot of the statements that's being said is usually blocked because they don't like the narrative, or the narrative doesn't follow the government's perspective, and thus they tried to stop. And I remember Dr. Zelensky, who basically raised his voice against the establishment, or the narrative, and unfortunately he passed away, not by COVID, but of a different sickness, illness. And he in his last days was really, really doing everything he can to raise the voice against this evil that have arisen in our country, calling something science when it was completely disproven, which it could have been taken care of other means, in which the government tied the hands of many, many, many doctors till this day. And it's been an unfortunate realization. And this is why we take a look at this morning Rabbi Albo's statement, and we're going to go right into it. And he says in chapter 2 of the book of Sefer Haikkarim, which is book number 4, chapter 2, the speculative science are not always in agreement on a given subject, but differ from one another in fundamental and other principles. Every exponent of a given science believes and maintains that the principles of his science are absolutely true and clear, and that only a fool or an ignoramus refuses to accept them. The exponents of another science desires those principles and maintain his own, which are in disagreement with the others. And this may be illustrated in the relations of astronomers to the physicists. The astronomers laid down two principles upon which he bases all of the proof of his science, namely the eccentric and the epicycle. The physicist, on the other hand, assumes that these are three kinds of motions from the center to the center, around the center. And this is the most important principle which he has. He also maintains the secular motion can take place only around a body that is permanently at rest. The astronomer denies all of this. For if we assume that the epicycle, we have a motion is neither to the center, nor from the center, nor around the center, unless we say that in the center of the epicycle, there is a body permanently at rest, and the earth, as it were, around which the epicycle revolves, and the diurnal sphere revolves around the earth, which is the central body and permanently at rest. And it would follow accordingly to this within the epicycle, which the planets are supposed to have, and there are others, earths, around which they revolve. This would then be other worlds in heaven. On the assumption of an eccentric, it also follows that the secular motion may exist a second body not permanently at rest. For on the distance, the center of the planetary eccentrics are the same as those above the elements in the lunar sphere. Some above the lunar sphere and some above the solar sphere, as Maimonides says in the Guides of the Perplexed, Part 2, Chapter 24. Interesting that here Rabbi Albo is talking about the astronomy and the science, and each science may be seen as speculative within its own scientific field. And this is true to this day. You cannot compare one field with the other, since they involve different premises or hypotheses. All of these strange and impossible ideas assume by the astronomer he proves from lunar and solar eclipse, which are perceived by the senses, and from the observation of conjunction in the aspects of the stars, which favors his assumptions. Accordingly, he bases all of his proof upon and pays no attention to the assumption and principles of the physicist. The physicist, on the other hand, denies the principles and assumptions of the astronomer and the strength of the physical theory. Though the sense favors the ideas of the astronomer, the physicist does not deny the data of the senses, but maintains that they have nothing to do with the principles and assumptions laid down by the astronomers, which are inherently impossible. And he holds that the phenomena are to be explained on some other principles which are not known. Now, this gets involved in this second chapter with the idea of knowledge, because a lot of it has to do with, as he says, the experience of what is observed by the eye. And as we know by science, not everything by the eye is correct. It can be an illusion to the eye or a diversion of the eye. And so we get into this area which Rabbi Albo also delves into, because we need to understand there are those who wish to prove God scientifically. And really there's no way of proving what cannot be seen and what cannot be heard, but can be felt. And here we go into the area of the senses. Let me drink some coffee. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihiyah bivaro. Another illustration of this disagreement of science is relationship of the astrologer and the philosopher. The philosopher denies God's knowledge and maintains the reality of the contingent. The astrologer, on the other hand, holds that the reality of God's knowledge, saying that God knows that which the constellation determines, and which cannot be otherwise, and therefore he denies the reality of the contingent. The theologian agrees with both, maintaining the reality of the contingent with the philosopher, which he proves from the evidence of the senses. as we have explained in the preceding chapter, in chapter 1, and believing likewise in the reality of God's knowledge in agreement with the astrologer. And this he proves by reason, which holds that we must not ascribe ignorance to God, for it is a defect in him if his knowledge does not embrace all that happens in the world. He also holds that God's knowledge is not incompatible with the category of contingent, for we see with our senses that the reality of the divine providence when rain comes down in the summer and the absence of moisture in the clouds, though the prayers of the righteous and the pious. Now, since the census testifies to this idea, we pay no attention to those who deny them any more than we pay attention to those pay attention to those naturalists' disagreements with the astronomer, as long as the census confirms the idea of the astronomer. In the same way, we pay no regards to the physicists who say that a point at rest cannot exist except in the body at rest, seeing that the mathematician can show in a revolving spherical body 2 points called poles. We are not in motion, but at rest, while the sphere as a whole is in motion. Similarly, everything to which the senses testify, we must admit to be true. Though we do not know the cause, as the physicist admits, the truth of ideas of the astronomer, which are testified by the senses, while denying the causes alleged by the astronomer to explain the phenomena, and holding that they are not the true causes, but they are other causes which we do not know. And here he ends chapter 2 with this point that in fact the knowledge or science, and in fact there is a major disagreement, and it's considered speculative until proven otherwise. And we have so much teachers of Torah trying to push people away from the sciences, from the secular knowledge, which really is to our benefit to be able to embrace. And here we have a big, you might say, struggle between the ultra-religious and the modern Orthodox Jew, who our traditions as Sephardims embrace always the idea of the knowledge that is attained by the study of secular science, math, astronomy, history. All of this we embrace, and so therefore many Orthodox Jews who basically sees the importance of these sciences, or what they call secular study, makes emphasis that it is nothing but part of the learning of our responsibility towards this earth, this world, and our obligation to help other people in humanity. And thus, we don't push away secular studies, but we do embrace Torah study as giving us a lot of illumination as to what is true, what is speculative, and what is not. And thus, we enter into this world where we see that even in this area of science, it is something that should be embraced, not removed. It's interesting, I was watching a video of a coach. He calls himself a coach, but he's a Hasidic Jew out of Israel, who's a Baal Shuva, one who returned back to Judaism. And he makes mention of the fact that he was raised in a very secular world before he became religious, and that the biggest problem that you'll find in a lot of the religious world is its rejection of secular studies, of philosophy, etc. And I would agree with them. There is a rejection. But our Sephardic rabbis and sages never did that. You're going to take a look at the Middle Ages, that many of the sages of the what we call Chachams always embraced the philosophies and science and ideas that had to deal with issues of speculative science, and were very involved. Even Maimonides, was a doctor who was every day involved in this aspect of secular study. As a matter of fact, he was renowned in the Muslim world because a lot of the things he wrote, by majority, even his writing primarily was in Arabic. It wasn't in Hebrew. It was later translated into Hebrew, but the majority of his literature was in Arabic of his time, and therefore he was a big powerhouse for the Muslim world. And many sheikhs or leaders of the Muslim world would follow him in his diagnosis, in his literatures, and saw him as a great man that he was. And all of this literature was then translated into Hebrew. So those of you who think that everything that a Jew writes is in Hebrew is incorrect, my friends. And so we understand that history brings us together with a lot of the speculative knowledge in order to bring us to the truth. A truth that right now is being really mocked at with this whole idea of multiple genderisms and all of this talk, which really goes against what we know as truth. For example, the two-gender argument. There's only two genders. There's not 150 genders. And so when we get into biology and getting into real science, there are things that are fundamental in it and cannot be denied. Yet, today's world, they look and create their own speculative scientific notions and ideas, which runs afoul to everything our senses see, our information provides, and goes against all of that. And yet, how ironic, how completely diametrically opposed is today's world with what we know as true. You know, and this is why it's laughable. And people say, well, you're making fun of me. You're not respecting my gender. There's only two genders. Which one is born? And of course, this now has become a topic of being blocked, removed, deleted, because it's part of a diabolical manipulation of what is true versus what they want to create as false. So that what they want to establish are false ideas and push that onto our children as the truth. My friends, we're living in a very completely speculative science that makes the lie, create a lie, a theory, into the truth. And if you don't respect the truth, you're hurting my feelings, and therefore you are going against this organization or this movement. Wake up, smell the coffee, get over with it, get over your tantrums, get over the idea that you don't have what is correct and true. Get back to the knowledge, get back to the basic educations that many of us have been brought up to, and stop delving into those areas that science, true science, negates. Well, this is Rabbi Moshe Otero. I want to thank you for being with me this morning, and may God bless you as we continue forward in this study of Sefer Haikkarim. And remember, we're now in going to be going into chapter 3 next week, where Rabbi Albo begins to show the exponents of the different science differs from one another in their assumptions, and thus we must find for everything a basis in the sense of perception, and pay no regards to anybody's idea except where they are in agreement with the sense data. Sense data is a key word, and we can see that very clearly being formulated with true science, where you know that there is X amount of chromosomes that makes a male, a female, a female. And while you're still perhaps wondering, what's a woman? We know what a woman is if we're talking about biological sense. If you want to say what you identify in, that's a mental, perhaps, psychosis that you're going into. And that's for a different form of science, which we can talk about that later if you want. I don't want to talk about it because there's a lot of people that are psychotically unstable because of their upraising, and this is the problem that we have in our world today, what should be addressed by the mental professionals, people who basically realize that they're creating a reality which is not biologically or materially real. So wake up, smell the coffee, and get right, and perhaps your life would get right with God and with human beings. Shalom, shalom. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero with the Ways of Israel.